Guys, MTG Matt for you, and today we're continuing our card wheel with Witherbloom, and we're starting off right away with Beldros Witherbloom. This is the Witherbloom Eldragon. Costs 7 mana, it's a 4/4, it's an Eldragon as all the dragons are. Got flying, and it says, at the beginning of each upkeep, create a 1/1 black and green pest creature with when this creature dies, you gain 1 life. So at the beginning of each upkeep, you create the Witherbloom mascot, and this works the same way as the Colma trigger does, as in it's at the beginning of each upkeep, so starting with your opponent's upkeep. And then it's got an activate ability. It says pay 10 life, untap all lands you control, activate only once each turn. Now, okay, there's a lot going on here. Before we go real deep into this card, the first thing that really struck my eye when I looked at this card was you pay 7 mana and you get a 4/4, which is, I think, just stat-wise, this seems really bad. So yes, it doesn't die to a Stomp, it doesn't die to a Frostbite, but there's the removal spells, like damage-based removal spells in red even, that deal like 4 damage for 2 mana, or you've got the Soul Spear that deals 5 damage. So this tells me this really dies really easily to a lot of stuff, right? Okay, that's the first thing that I observed. Then secondly, let's take a look at the upkeep trigger on each upkeep. So with Witherbloom, what you really like to do is sacrificing stuff and also use your life as a resource. And obviously the mascots provide you with value for both of these game plans. So the upkeep trigger is definitely right? You get a 1/1 each turn, and you can sack them, you gain some life, and so on. And then when you sack them, you gain life. This fuels the activate ability of Belarus, with its pay life. Pay 10 life untap all lands you control. This is obviously super powerful, and ideally what you want to do is play Beladros and be able to immediately activate the ability. So they basically got Beladros on the battlefield for free, right? You got this on the battlefield for free. You pay 10 life to untap all lands you control. And then you can use your mana as you wish. And what I can totally see work is an actual Witherbloom deck that focuses on draining your opponent, because we've got the new Liliana Planeswalker that's got a Magecraft trigger that drains your opponent, gains you some life. We've got, which we'll see later, the Witherbloom Apprentice, which basically has the same effect. And if you build a game plan around Witherbloom with graveyard recursion, graveyard of value, and gaining life and stuff, then I could see Beldros Witherbloom make sense as a 2-off in those decks, where you put this down, you immediately can pay the 10 life, and then you can use your mana all over again. And then, ideally you have a deck where you can get a lot of life a lot of times, and then this gets really powerful. However, you also need to be realistic here in that paying 10 life in standard construct is very hard to do. You start with only 20 lives, so if you actually want to utilize that without dying immediately, you really need to build your deck around that. And sure, against control matchups, this is rather easy to pull off. Against arrow matchups, this is next to impossible. So, yeah, what do I think about Belarus Witherbloom? I actually like the card, it's pretty cool, and I'm gonna put this in tier 3 category, I guess. It's just the activate ability is really hard to pull off, and the upkeep trigger, while the type of effect is obviously the same type of effect as Coma has, because Coma also just creates creatures each upkeep, there is a big difference in that Coma makes 3 freeze, this makes 1/1, so that's stat-wise a big difference. And secondly, the serpents protect Coma, which this doesn't. So obviously I want to try this, but the thing is that my gut instinct is telling me this is probably going to be like in a tier 4 category. It's not going to see a lot of play, but I do hope I'm wrong here. I hope this is going to see more play than only in like janky decks, because I think the concept is super cool. It's just that it's got very little stats to start with, so it dies easily to damage removal spells, or it has a hard time blocking stuff. And then on top of that, obviously dies to any removal spell, and you pay 7 mana for it. So that's a big investment with a big risk. However, you can pay the 10 life in response, so that's something, I guess. But I'm gonna put this in tier 4 category. Next up, we got Harness Infinity. This one is pretty crazy. 7 mana for an instant spell. The art is amazing. Exchange your hand and graveyard, exile Harness Infinity. So just a few words, but those words seem very powerful. So this is like the ultimate graveyard value card, right? I think what makes this card really crazy to me is the fact that it's an instant. You can just comfortably hold your mana open, and then on your opponent's end step, Harness Infinity, and start your turn with, you know, if you build your deck right, and the game has been going on for a few turns, which it will if you're able to cast for 7 mana, you can easily get like 11, 12 cards in hand, or cards that you've already used, so probably all cards that you want to use again. And then you have this big value bomb. So this card is just universally good. The only question with this card is there a deck that wants to fit this in, which also is sure to, you know, get enough value out of the graveyard? And actually, I think it's already enough if you say, I'm gonna build a Witherbloom deck, which is kind of controlling with a lot of removal spells, so that you use your removal spells early on, fill up your graveyard with them, and then later you just get them back. However, while I'm saying this, I realize that the longer the game goes on, the less likely it is that you're going to need more removal spells. So as you can see, there are already some challenges there, and still with some kind of self-mill deck, this could make sense. If we take the top meta decks into account right now, such as Sultai Ultimatum, I don't think that Sultai Ultimatum wants this card. It can cast it from Immersion Ultimatum because it's not monocolored, and they already got 80 cards in their deck, so they're not really that reliant on, you know, getting stuff back from the graveyard. That being said, this card is there to basically draw you cards, right? It's not really about interacting with your graveyard for that matter. So yeah, what do I think about this card? It's obviously super powerful in basically any control type of deck that is in those colors can really make use of this. And actually, if we go back, even like some kind of like aggressive deck can maybe utilize this. Really, if you use like a lot of instant sorceries, this could be cool, because instant sorceries, you always just, you cast them and then they go to the graveyard after they resolve, right? So it's easier to get instant sorceries into a graveyard as opposed to permanents, obviously. So in a deck where you use a lot of instant sorceries, this could be really, really good. Yeah. And in like aggro decks, I guess you don't want to get to 7 mana, you want to have won the game by then. So for control types, like this value bomb, and I'm putting this at tier 3 just because I don't think it's going to see that much play, but it's just undoubtedly a very powerful card on its own, and you can definitely make it work in some way or other. Okay, next up we got a dual modal card here. It's Black's Vexing Pest and 3 for blacks. So on the front we've got Blacks, which is a creature, 3 mana, 3/2. In green it's a pest. It says other pests, bats, insects, snakes, and spiders you control get +1/+1. And when Black's Vexing Pest dies, you gain 4 lives. So On the front side, this creature is actually quite terrible because it dies to a stomp. It only got 2 toughness, so it really dies to anything that touches it. The commander effect or general effect of +1/+1 is really negligible because sure, the Witherbloom mascots are pests, but I imagine from the cards I've seen that pests are not really there to swing in on your opponent. Sure, you can do it here and there, but they're mainly there to be sacrificed to gain you some life and synergize with your other cards. So the +1/+1 effect there is really irrelevant, and the other creature types are also quite irrelevant for standard. So this creature is really just there that if you play a control type of deck in these colors, in Witherbloom colors, you have something to play early, to just put this down, maybe use it as a blocker, and then gain 4 life. And then the gain 4 life is actually relevant. So that's the gain 4 life is probably the best part about this card. But then on the back, so we got Search for Blacks, 4 mana sorcery in black. It says, look at the top 5 cards in your library. You may put any number of them into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. You lose 3 life for each card you put into your hand this way. So again, we see this theme here, using life as a resource. So if you can get a lot of life throughout the game, Search for Blacks is a big reward because this allows you to pay 4 mana and basically draw up to 5 cards, but you then also have to pay 15 life. And whether Search for Blacks is good really depends on how reliably you can gain a lot of life, because drawing 5 cards is the extreme case, but let's think a moment here, right? I think to feel satisfying, this card should draw you at least 3 cards for 4 mana. That seems like a good rate, right? So we want to get at least 3 cards. And then you would already pay 9 life, which is just so much. It's really a lot. And on the cards we're going to see, there is a lot of like life gaining support in Witherbloom. So Witherbloom has the means to gain a lot of life. But I'm doubting that even if you're building a deck which is really good in gaining a lot of life, you can gain that much life that you can just casually say, oh, I'm just gonna pay 9 life to draw 3 cards. It just seems like way too much. Because sure, against a control deck, this seems easy, but once you run into like a mono white aggro, into a mono red aggro or something, you're just never going to be able to use this card. Just even for 1 card, 4 mana, pay 3 life, draw 1 card, put the rest in the graveyard, seems really bad. So the more I think about this card, the less convinced I am that this is actually good. And it really Witherbloom, for this card to be able to work, Witherbloom must be a kind of archetype which can, just easily get to like 40 life within the first 5, 6, 7 turns without taking damage, without accounting for damage. So I'm doubting that's going to be that possible. So I'm just actually going to put this into the tier 4 category. I don't think it's going to see too much play. Yeah, and that's my take on that. I just don't think it's going to work very well. Next up, we got actually a card I like, is Damog of Titans. 4 mana, 11/10 demon. So crazy stat line. And whenever it attacks or blocks, sacrifice a creature. So the stat line obviously is ridiculous. You get a 4 mana, 11/10. Just to remind you guys, because I think a lot of you are not aware of this, in standard there is a dinosaur where you pay 5 green mana to get a 10/10 with 0 abilities, right? I think it's called Gigantosaurus, and it's actually from the MTG Arena cards, basically from like the tutorial. So it's technically, it's not in a standard legal set, but it's still standard legal on Arena. But just as a comparison, that that these types of creatures basically exist in Arena and nobody plays them, right? However, that being said, this costs 1 mana less. It's just 4 mana for an 11/10. And the tax on it can be a downside, but you might also want to sacrifice creatures here and there. So this doesn't necessarily need to be a downside. Also, what I like about this card is that you can play this with Witherbloom colors. You can play this with mono green or mono black because it's got hybrid mana, right? And the way that I looked at this card is, for me, this is just a fling target. So you play this, it's an 11/10. You have a fling type effect. So for those of you who don't know, there are currently, I think, 2 fling type effects in standard. It's actual fling for 2 mana, sacrifice a creature, deal damage equal to its power to any target. And then there is, I think it's called Kizul's Fury from Zendikar Rising. It's on a dual modal land. You pay 5 mana for the same effect, right? So if you imagine you play this in like a Rakdos style deck, you pay 4 black mana, put this down, and then you just sling it for 11 mana. And you put this, on the Zendikar Rising dual modal land, so it's actually not a dead draw because you can always just play it as a land. And this is where I see that this creature could see some play. Also, obviously, if you already play this in like Rakdos colorless, this is obviously amazing Embercleave target. But all in all, let's just be realistic. This deadline is ridiculous. But it's just 4 mana, put it down, and then it can die due removal. And then even if you just block, you have to sacrifice a creature, so you need small stuff out. But this shouldn't be too hard to accomplish with Witherbloom. So where I see this card is in actual Witherbloom deck, right? Where you actually have creatures to sacrifice, creatures to spare. Or in a Rakdos style deck. However, in Rakdos style deck it's also sometimes hard to cast a creature for 4 black mana. But this might become easier with the new dual lands we are getting with Strixhaven. So all in all, I actually think this card has some merit. It can go into some decks, and I'm gonna put this at like tier 3, maybe. Put this in like tier 3, just have a big beater. Obviously in Witherbloom it's best suited, to just get a lot of stuff out, and also this big power also has a different application, which you're going to see later in this very review, where Witherbloom has some effects so you can use a creature's power to your advantage. So because of that, I'm gonna put this in tier 3 category, I think. Next up, we got the Witherbloom command. All those commands were the first card spawned of the set. Actually, let me go back real quick. Maybe this is like tier 4. Maybe actually. My gut instinct telling me this is actually tier 4. I want to be realistic in. I learned that with evaluating cards, it's usually right to be very pessimistic about them, very realistic for standard. And while like cards and everything, to be realistic, I think this is more of a tier 4 card. Okay, but back to Witherbloom command. So all these commands got spoiled first. I'm not going to go too deep into this, just read it once. So 2 mana sorcery, choose 2. Target player mills 3 cards, then you return a land card from your graveyard to your hand. Destroy target non-creature, non-land permanent with mana value 2 or less. Target creature gets -3/-1 until end of turn. And target opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So, positive stuff about this is, first off, target creature gets -3/-1 until end of turn. This hits Seasoned Hellblades. It gets around indestructible. So that's very meta relevant. The destroy target non-creature, non-land permanent with mana value 2 or less is, I think, completely irrelevant for standard because people are not really playing food decks anymore, so there isn't like Trail of Crumbs running around in standard, so this is basically useless. And then the other 2 modes is like, okay, gain 2 life, lose 2 life, and you can build some cards and get a land card. So I think this is one of the worst commands, because even though it can hit a Seasoned Hellblade or other small creatures to remove them early, gain some life, which is, or you know, get your land card for the early game, this card is just absolutely terrible in the late game. So if you're playing a control deck, I don't think you want to play this at all. So I don't know. I think this doesn't fit into a control deck. It doesn't fit into an aggro deck. So actually, I'm gonna... Where is it? I think I'm going to put this in the 0 play in constructed category. I don't think this is going to see any play. If I think about it. It's just too bad in the late game and doesn't do enough. Next I've got a dual model card, which is Valentine, Dean of the Vein. 1 mana, 1/1 black. It's a Vampire Warlock with Menace and Lifelink. And it says if a non-token creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. When you do, you may pay 2. If you do, create a 1/1 black and green pest creature token with. When this creature dies, you gain 1 life. And then on the backside, we got Lisette, Dean of the Root, 4 mana, 4/4 human druid. Which says whenever you gain life, you may pay 1. If you do, put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control, and those creatures can trample until end of turn. So a lot going on here. Right off the gate, I think you want to play this card for Lisette, Dean of the Root only, because Lisette seems like an actually really good card. You get a 4 mana 4/4, so the stat line is just fine. And then the static effect is just really good. Just paying 1 mana every time you gain life to basically have a Heliod effect on every creature you control is really powerful. And because of Lisette, I could see, and because of Lisette and some other cards we're going to see in a card review, I could see that Selesnya life gain could become some type of archetype where you go pretty wide, have some life gain synergies, and then you put Lisette down, and the turn after you... It's really enough if you gain life like 2 times, pay 2 mana, and then you put 2 1/1 counters on each creature control, and they gain trample. So that seems really good. On the front side, Valentine, I think it's just pretty bad. The passive effect is just irrelevant. Some of your opponents don't even have creatures. And then if those actually die, you have to pay 2 mana to get this pest creature token. It just seems like a lot of work for very little upside, so I think for this card I'm going to evaluate this only by Lisette, Dean of the Root, because I think Lisette has some potential. And because of that, where do I have it? It's here. I think I'm gonna put Lisette in like tier 3 category, maybe tier 4, something like that. I think Selesnya life gain could be a really fun archetype. Also a bit different than usual, you know, mono white life gain. So I think I'm putting this in tier 4, because I think there's still going to be some kind of fringe deck type, but I could see this becoming pretty powerful. So I'm being cautiously putting this in tier 4, but I have high hopes for this set. Let's take a Rushed Rebirth. 2 mana instant with choose target creature. When the creature dies this turn, search level for a creature card with lesser mana value. Put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. So, very interesting card, very unique effect. First thing I want to state is that it says choose target creature. It doesn't say choose target creature you control. So you can also choose creatures your opponent controls. And then you just pay 2 mana and get something from your library that's, you know, has a lesser mana value. How good is that? Not sure actually. This card obviously works best if you have high CMC creatures out. But even with low CMC stuff, if you get this onto like a 3 mana, 4 mana value type of creature, you can grab something from your library and get it onto the battlefield, which is pretty cool. I just don't know in what kind of deck this would make sense, because you obviously want a lot of benefit from this kind of card, right? So the fact that you get creature from your library has to be really, really good to justify that you use up a whole deck slot for this card, because just by itself, like if you put this into any creature deck, and the effect you get is basically, okay, my creature dies, I just get another creature without a big upside or a big synergy, I don't think this card is worth it. So for me, the challenge here is, what kind of deck would you put this in? Because keep in mind, you have to, if you want to get use of this card, for example, you play like a 4-mana creature, and then you still need to have 2 mana left off to be able to use this card at instant speed if your opponent removes it. So that's a lot of commitment in a deck slot, and to me this just feels not very realistic to be played just as a value card, because by itself this card does nothing, right? If you top deck this and you have nothing on the board, it's the worst feeling ever. So I actually think Rush Rebirth isn't going to see any play in Standard Constructed. Next up, we got a non-dual mold card with Pestle and Cauldron and Restorative Burst. Let's take a look at the Cauldron first. 3-mana artifact in black, and it's got 3 abilities. First one, tap, discard a card. Create a 1 black and green pest creature home with when this creature dies, you gain 1 life. Second ability, pay 1 mana, tap it. Each opponent wins cards equal to the amount of life you gained this turn. And then 4 mana, tap it, exile 4 target cards from a single graveyard, draw a card. So very versatile artifact. The most notable one, in my opinion, is the first one, because you can use it to put stuff into your graveyard that you actually want to have there, and then this way create creature homes for free. And it's actually for free because you don't have to pay any mana. So if you play this onto a 3 mana open, you can actually use it right away, which matters a lot, that you can get value out of it immediately. So that's pretty cool. And then the other 2 abilities, the first one is you're trying to mill your opponent equal to the amount of life you gain this turn, which can be a lot of, you can mill a lot of cards in the right deck. And it's just an interesting concept to say, I want to build a life gain deck, and with the life gain, mill my opponent. And notably, the Pestle and Cauldron is not a legendary artifact, so you can have multiple of these on the board. So that's like a whole new concept that I have not experienced yet in Standard with this type of effect. It's very unique. And I think if you want to use this effect, it needs to be in this, like in a specific deck that wants to obtain this goal, because just by itself, I think this is not a ability we want to activate, right? Because if you play some kind of value deck where you want to have this card in, and you occasionally gain some life, you would still not want to use this second ability to just mill your opponent occasionally, right? If this is not part of your game plan. So if you want to use the second ability, it needs to be in a specific deck that's built around it. So because of that, I think you can look at Pestle and Cauldron and say that in general, you want to look at this card in a way that the second ability doesn't exist, because you almost never use it, and just look at the first and the third ability. And the third ability, it's pay 4 mana, exile some cards, draw a card. I think that's actually pretty good, because, it just gives you repeated card draw. But also, exiling stuff from graveyard is actually relevant in Standard. We see it again and again with like Rakdos style decks, or Lurrus is still around, so mono white decks get stuff back from the graveyard for Lurrus. It's really nice to exile those Deepmere rogues so they can get back to the battlefield. So exiling has actually a lot of benefits, and if you can exile your opponent's graveyard and also draw a card, that's enough value. That's really pretty good. So I actually like Pestle and Cauldron, and it can fit in a deck where you have some kind of value game plan, and where you're also happy to just discard cards on your own because you want to have some graveyard graveyard synergies. For example, You can use Pestle and Cauldron to discard high CMC cards and then get them back later with Hardness Infinity, for example. That's very simply put. And then the other side is Restorative Burst, 5 mana sorcery in green. Says return up to 2 target creature, land, and or planeswalker cards from your graveyard to your hand. Each player gains for life, exile, Restorative Burst. So obviously both sides are looking at value, at graveyard recursion, and I actually really like this card. I think it's a lot of value. You have some outlet where you can throw cards into a graveyard you may just want to use later. Restorative Burst can give you, 2 specific cards and gain 4 life. If you're a controller, it doesn't matter that your opponent is also gaining 4 life. And in a way, Restorative Burst is a bit overcosted, but it's fine because it's a dual model card, right? You're basically paying for the flexibility. So in the early game, you can play Pestle and Cauldron. In the late game, the Restorative Burst. And I just really think overall this is a solid dual model card, which can definitely see some play in some kind of value control deck. So I think this is at least tier 4 category, and it's just one of those cards I really want to try to make work. It could go up to tier 3, but I doubt it, so I put this in tier 4. But I really like this card. Next up, we got an interesting one. It's Culling Ritual. 4 mana sorcery. Destroy each non-land permanent with mana value 2 or less. Add black or green for each permanent destroyed this way. So, a very powerful effect here. Is kind of a very restricted board wipe. And but I would like you to, think deeper with this card. Sure, if your opponent plays like mono red aggro, for example, and he's got a bunch of 1-drops, 2-drops on board, or he plays mono white and got a bunch of 1 and 2 drops. This is just a decent board wipe. It's not as good as Extinction Event, because Extinction Event actually exiles, so it gets around indestructible. This doesn't. However, occasionally this will still be enough. And also I want you to think about that Witherbloom is all about, making those pest creature tokens or sacrificing stuff. And if you also have stuff on your side of the board laying around, right? Let's say you have like 2 tokens on your side, on your opponent has like 3 creatures on his side, and they all have mana value 2 or less. You can cast Culling Ritual on turn 4, destroy all of them, and basically gain 5 mana back. So you cast this, not only did you cast this for free, but you even gained 1 mana. And to me, this is just a very, very good sideboard card, right? If you put this in your sideboard and you face a deck which is very, very aggressive, you can main deck this and keep it handy and then cast it and basically have a turn where you board wipe while basically not paying any mana. And because of that, I think Culling Ritual is definitely going to see some play. I'd put this into a tier 3 category. Like removal always finds its place if it's good enough, and I think the effect of Culling Ritual is very very unique in standard, and it hits relevant targets, so that's pretty cool. Next we got a Demon of Woe Eater, 4 mana 7/6 demon, which has at the beginning of upkeep sacrifice a creature, and when you sacrifice the Demon of Woe Eater, each opponent discards a card, you draw a card, and you gain 2 life. So a lot going on here. First off, obviously the big premium stat line, 4 mana 7/6. But then a big drawback at the beginning of your upkeep, sack a creature. But when you sacrifice itself, you actually get a lot of it, right? Opponent discards a card, you draw a card, and you gain 2 life. I actually don't want to go too deep into this card, because I think I would just put it next to the Demogorgon Demon. What was it called? Take a look actually here. The Demogorgon Titan. I think those creatures are very similar in their purpose, in their application. And the nice thing about Demogorgon Woe Eater is, though, that it actually synergizes perfectly with Fling type effects. Because Fling has you sacrifice a creature, so this actually triggers the Woe Eater's ability, and the effect is really good, right? You draw a card, gain 2 life, your opponent discards a card. So because of that, I would also put this in like tier 4 next to the Demon of Titan. Next I got Mortality Spear. So let me tell you, the removal in this set is just off the charts. There's so much removal and so much good removal, and this is one of them. So Mortality Spear, 4 mana instant. This spell costs 2 less to cast if you gain life this turn. Destroy target non-land permanent. So we have this exact same effect right now in Standard at the exact same mana cost in Binding the Old Gods, right? Which is a saga, which means it's sorcery speed. And sure, Mortality Spear doesn't get you a land, and you can flicker it with Yorion. However, Mortality Spear is instant speed, and you know, paying 4 mana for this effect instant speed is already good enough. You don't even need upside. But this even has the upside that if you get life, it just costs 2 mana. It just basically has, what's it called? I forgot. Like this 2 mana removal spell in Golgari colors, right? Which also destroys a non-land permanent. So, Mortality Spear is just a very solid, powerful card, and there's nothing much to say. I'm going to put this in tier 2. I'm not sure if it's going to replace Binding the Old Gods. I don't think so. But still, it's just a very good, solid card, and it's just good. Oh, next up, we got one of my favorites here, right? It's Witherbloom Apprentice, 2 mana 2 human druid with Magecraft. It says, whenever you cast a copy instant sorcery spell, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So, I think of all the apprentices, this is the best one. I could really see this being played in some kind of, you know, Witherbloom control-y value deck where you just put these on the board. You have ways of getting them back from the graveyard over and over again. And then you just cast a bunch of instant sorceries. Just gain life all the time you drain your opponent. And you just have a good time. And sure, this does the storm and everything, but that's why I'm saying, I think if you put this in a deck which has an easy time just getting stuff back from the graveyard to the battlefield, which should be easy enough, right, with Witherbloom Apprentice. This just seems really cool and the effect really matters, so I think Witherbloom Apprentice, where do we put this? It's like tier 3, tier 4. Realistically, it's tier 4. But I'm only going to put this in tier 4 because I think people underestimate this effect. I think it's not going to see a lot of play. But for me, I think this effect is actually good enough that it's, you know, worthy of tier 3. So I'm leaving it in tier 4, but for me, I'm saying I think this card is really good and I'm actually going to try to make this work, and I think it's just very solid. Next we got Tend the Pest. 2 mana instant. As additional cost cast spell, sacrifice a creature, and you create X mono and black and green pest creature tokens, where X is sacrifice creature's power. So this card is the big payoff basically for running something like the Demog of Woe Eater, right? You 7 power and you have to sacrifice a creature at the beginning of your upkeep, but if you sacrifice it beforehand, not only do you get the sacrifice payoff, but you also get 7 of those tokens, which is really, really good. Or you sacrifice your Demog of Time, you get 11 tokens. So that's basically what these high power creatures are there for, is for Tend the Pest. And I think it's actually a really, really great concept, right? Like your opponent wants to remove some of your big stuff. Instead, you sacrifice your stuff, and you get a lot of these tokens, which are just nasty to deal with. They synergize well with life gain, with sacrificing, and so on. So I really, really like Tend the Pest. I think it's going to be a key element in a good Witherbloom deck. And I think this can also, it can find some application outside of, you know, just Witherbloom-centric decks, just any deck that wants to sacrifice a creature. And maybe, you know, if you play this in like Junt with Corvold, which I know nobody's playing, but it's still in Standard, this can be a very solid card, which just gives you a lot of sacrifice outlets, and I really like this. So I think, is this a tier 3 card? It's just so solid, but it requires a lot of, you know, setup, and you need to hold 2 mana open. But you know, you're in black-green colors. You shouldn't have too many mana issues. So I think Handlepest is a really interesting card, and which can see some play. I think I leave this edge in tier 3 because I think people are going to experiment with this. As we got Deadly Brew, it's a sorcery for 2 mana. Each player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. If you sacrifice a permanent spell, you may return another permanent card from graveyard to your hand. This is just a very nice value. If you have your past creature tokens that you don't mind sacking, it gains new life. Your opponent might have to sack a big creature, or just a bigger creature, that's enough. And then you get a permanent back from graveyard to your hand. So this is just really, really nice value. And where do we put this? Where do we put this? I mean, you can also just play this with 0 creatures on your side, if your opponent has just 1 creature out on the board. And having creature sacrifice is actually a big deal in Standard because of stuff like Seasoned Hellblade, right? And because of a lot of indestructible stuff. So, against like aggro decks, this can be pretty bad. But against any deck which wants to run bigger creatures like Rule Aggro or like Rule Avengers, this can be fine. I would put this in like the tier 4 category. Let's go Dina Soulsteeper, 2 mana, 1/3 legendary creature, Dryad Druid. It says whenever you gain life, each opponent loses 1 life. And you can pay 1 second on a creature to give it +X/+O until firmware access the sacrificed creature's power. So it's a sack outlet. You gain life, each opponent loses 1 life. But if you like to have such an effect, then what's it called? Is it Torbrand? No. But basically the 3 mana vampire that has your opponent lose life for the amount of life you gain is just better than this. And because of that, I don't think it's going to see any play, even though it's had a sack outlet. If you want to have this effect, just play the vampire, even the Witherbloom tag, so I think it's going to see 0 play. Let's go Blood Researcher, 3 mana, 2/2 vampire druid with menace, and whenever you gain life, put a 1/1 counter on Blood Researcher. So it's a Janus Pridemate. But with menace, which is nice, you pay 3 mana. But I don't think it's going. I mean, it's going to see play. This, whenever you get life, put a 1 counter on something, basically sees play every set somehow. So I have to be fair and put this in like tier 4, just because people are going to play it. But it's obviously not a great card. Next up we got Infused with Vitality, 2 mana instant. Until end of turn, target creature against Death Touch, and when this creature dies, return to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control, and you gain 2 life. Nice effect, however, won't see any play in Standard. We've got these types of effects in Standard, nobody plays them. Next time we got Moldering Karok. It's a 4 mana 3/3 zombie crocodile with trample lifelink. It's going to see 0 play in constructed. And finally we got Witherbloom Pledge Mage. 5 mana 5/5 Treefolk Warlock with Magecraft. When you cast a common instant source spell, you gain 1 life. The effect is actually quite okay, however, this is just not going to see any play. The effect is too minor and the cost is too high. And with that said, that's my review on Witherbloom. A lot of cool cards. I really like the Witherbloom archetype. Definitely looking forward to this. Building these kinds of Witherbloom decks. Make them control-y, make them so that you drain your opponent and so on. And yeah, stay tuned for the rest of the card review. Hey there, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this kind of content and want to see more fresh decks and standard meta decks, please consider subscribing. I would really appreciate it, and I see you guys soon.